Hello. Tonight, we begin with the most fascinating fairy tale. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Tinder-Box, a soldier came marching along the high road. Left, right, left, right. He had his knapsack on his back and a sword at his side. He had been to the wars and was now returning home. As he walked on, he met a very frightful-looking old witch in the road. Her underlip hung quite down on her breast, and she stopped and said, "Good evening, soldier. You have a very fine sword and a large knapsack, and you are a real soldier. So you shall have as much money as ever you like." "Thank you, old witch," said the soldier. "Do you see that large tree?" said the witch, pointing to a tree which stood beside them. "Well, it is quite hollow inside, and you must climb to the top, when you will see a hole through which you can let yourself down into the tree to a great depth. I will tie a rope round your body so that I can pull you up again when you call out to me." "But what am I to do down there in the tree?" asked the soldier. "Get money," she replied. "For you must know that when you reach the ground under the tree, you will find yourself in a large hall lighted up by 300 lamps. You will then see 3 doors, which can be easily opened, for the keys are in all the locks. On entering the first of the chambers, to which these doors lead, you will see a large chest standing in the middle of the floor, and upon it a dog seated, with a pair of eyes as large as teacups. But you need not be at all afraid of him. I will give you my blue checked apron, which you must spread upon the floor, and then boldly seize hold of the dog and place him upon it. You can then open the chest and take from it as many pence as you please. They are only copper pence. But if you would rather have silver money, you must go into the second chamber. Here you will find another dog with eyes as big as mill wheels. But do not let that trouble you. Place him upon my apron, and then take what money you please. If, however, you like gold best, enter the third chamber, where there is another chest full of it. The dog who sits on this chest is very dreadful. His eyes are as big as a tower, but do not mind him. If he also is placed upon my apron, he cannot hurt you, and you may take from the chest what gold you will." "This is not a bad story," said the soldier. But what am I to give you, you old witch? For of course, you do not mean to tell me all this for nothing." "No," said the witch, "but I do not ask for a single penny. Only promise to bring me an old Tinder-Box, which my grandmother left behind the last time she went down there." "Very well, I promise. Now tie the rope round my body." "Here it is," replied the witch, "and here is my blue checked apron." As soon as the rope was tied, the soldier climbed up the tree and let himself down through the hollow to the ground beneath. And here he found, as the witch had told him, a large hall in which many hundred lamps were all burning. Then he opened the first door. Ah, there sat the dog, with the eyes as large as teacups, staring at him. "You're a pretty fellow," said the soldier, seizing him and placing him on the witch's apron, while he filled his pockets from the chest with as many pieces as they would hold. Then he closed the lid, seated the dog upon it again, and walked into another chamber. And sure enough, there sat the dog, with eyes as big as mill wheels. "You had better not look at me in that way," said the soldier. "You will make your eyes water." And then he seated him also upon the apron, and opened the chest. But when he saw what a quantity of silver money it contained, he very quickly threw away all the coppers he had taken, and filled his pockets and his knapsack with nothing but silver. Then he went into the third room, and there the dog was really hideous. His eyes were truly as big as towers, and they turned round and round in his head like wheels. "Good morning," said the soldier, touching his cap, for he had never seen such a dog in his life. But after looking at him more closely, he thought he had been civil enough, so he placed him on the floor and opened the chest. Good gracious, what a quantity of gold there was, enough to buy all the sugar sticks of the sweet stuff women, all the tin soldiers, whips, and rocking horses in the world, or even the whole town itself. There was, indeed, an immense quantity. So the soldier now threw away all the silver money he had taken, and filled his pockets and his knapsack with gold instead. And not only his pockets and his knapsack, but even his cap and boots, so that he could scarcely walk. He was really rich now, so he replaced the dog on the chest, closed the door, and called up through the tree, "Now pull me out, you old witch." "Have you got the Tinder-Box?" asked the witch. "No, I declare I quite forgot it." So he went back and fetched the Tinder-Box, and then the witch drew him up out of the tree, and he stood again in the high road, with his pockets, his knapsack, his cap, and his boots full of gold. "What are you going to do with the Tinder-Box?" asked the soldier. "That is nothing to you," replied the witch. "You have the money. Now give me the Tinder-Box." "I tell you what," said the soldier. "If you don't tell me what you are going to do with it, I will draw my sword and cut off your head." "No," said the witch. The soldier immediately cut off her head, and there she lay on the ground. Then he tied up all his money in her apron and slung it on his back like a bundle, put the Tinder-Box in his pocket, and walked off to the nearest town. It was a very nice town, and he put up at the best inn and ordered a dinner of all his favorite dishes, for now he was rich and had plenty of money. The servant who cleaned his boots thought they certainly were a shabby pair to be worn by such a rich gentleman, for he had not yet bought any new ones. The next day, however, he procured some good clothes and proper boots, so that our soldier soon became known as a fine gentleman. And the people visited him and told him all the wonders that were to be seen in the town, and of the king's beautiful daughter, the princess. "Where can I see her?" asked the soldier. "She is not to be seen at all," they said. "She lives in a large copper castle, surrounded by walls and towers. No one but the king himself can pass in or out, for there has been a prophecy that she will marry a common soldier, and the king cannot bear to think of such a marriage." "I should like very much to see her," thought the soldier, but he could not obtain permission to do so. However, he passed a very pleasant time, went to the theater, drove in the king's garden, and gave a great deal of money to the poor, which was very good of him. He remembered what it had been in olden times to be without a shilling. Now he was rich, had fine clothes, and many friends, who all declared he was a fine fellow and a real gentleman. And all this gratified him exceedingly. But his money would not last forever, and as he spent and gave away a great deal daily and received none, he found himself at last with only 2 shillings left. So he was obliged to leave his elegant rooms and live in a little garret under the roof, where he had to clean his own boots and even mend them with a large needle. None of his friends came to see him. There were too many stairs to mount up. One dark evening, he had not even a penny to buy a candle. Then all at once, he remembered that there was a piece of candle stuck in the Tinder-Box, which he had brought from the old tree, into which the witch had helped him. He found the Tinder-Box, but no sooner had he struck a few sparks from the flint and steel than the door flew open, and the dog, with eyes as big as teacups, whom he had seen while down in the tree, stood before him and said, "What orders, master?" "Hello," said the soldier. "Well, this is a pleasant Tinder-Box, if it brings me all I wish for." "Bring me some money," said he to the dog. He was gone in a moment, and presently returned, carrying a large bag of coppers in his month. The soldier very soon discovered after this the value of the Tinder-Box. If he struck the flint once, the dog who sat on the chest of copper money made his appearance. If twice, the dog came from the chest of silver. And if 3 times, the dog with eyes like towers, who watched over the gold. The soldier had now plenty of money. He returned to his elegant rooms and reappeared in his fine clothes, so that his friends knew him again directly and made as much of him as before. After a while, he began to think it was very strange that no one could get a look at the princess. "Everyone says she is very beautiful," thought he to himself. "But what is the use of that if she is to be shut up in a copper castle surrounded by so many towers? Can I by any means get to see her? Stop! Where is my Tinder-Box?" Then he struck a light, and in a moment the dog, with eyes as big as teacups, stood before him. "It is midnight," said the soldier, "yet I should very much like to see the princess, if only for a moment." The dog disappeared instantly, and before the soldier could even look round, he returned with the princess. She was lying on the dog's back asleep, and looked so lovely that everyone who saw her would know she was a real princess. The soldier could not help kissing her, true soldier as he was. Then the dog ran back with the princess, but in the morning, while at breakfast with the king and queen, she told them what a singular dream she had had during the night, of a dog and a soldier, that she had ridden on the dog's back and been kissed by the soldier. "That is a very pretty story, indeed," said the queen. So the next night, one of the old ladies of the court was set to watch by the princess's bed, to discover whether it really was a dream, or what else it might be. The soldier longed very much to see the princess once more, so he sent for the dog again in the night to fetch her, and to run with her as fast as ever he could. But the old lady put on water boots and ran after him as quickly as he did, and found that he carried the princess into a large house. She thought it would help her to remember the place if she made a large cross on the door with a piece of chalk. Then she went home to bed, and the dog presently returned with the princess. But when he saw that a cross had been made on the door of the house where the soldier lived, he took another piece of chalk and made crosses on all the doors in the town, so that the lady in waiting might not be able to find out the right door. Early the next morning, the king and queen accompanied the lady and all the officers of the household to see where the princess had been. "Here it is," said the king, when they came to the first door with a cross on it. "No, my dear husband, "It must be that one," said the queen, pointing to a second door having a cross also. "And here is one, and there is another," they all exclaimed, for there were crosses on all the doors in every direction. So they felt it would be useless to search any farther. But the queen was a very clever woman. She could do a great deal more than merely ride in a carriage. She took her large gold scissors, cut a piece of silk into squares, and made a neat little bag. This bag she filled with buckwheat flour and tied it round the princess's neck. And then she cut a small hole in the bag so that the flour might be scattered on the ground as the princess went along. During the night, the dog came again and carried the princess on his back and ran with her to the soldier, who loved her very much and wished that he had been a prince so that he might have her for a wife. The dog did not observe how the flour ran out of the bag all the way from the castle wall to the soldier's house, and even up to the window, where he had climbed with the princess. Therefore, in the morning, the king and queen found out where their daughter had been, and the soldier was taken up and put in prison. Oh, how dark and disagreeable it was as he sat there, and the people said to him, "Tomorrow you will be hanged." It was not very pleasant news, and besides, he had left the Tinder-Box at the inn. In the morning, he could see through the iron grating of the little window how the people were hastening out of the town to see him hanged. He heard the drums beating and saw the soldiers marching. Everyone ran out to look at them, and a shoemaker's boy with a leather apron and slippers on galloped by so fast that one of his slippers flew off and struck against the wall where the soldier sat looking through the iron grating. "Hello, you shoemaker's boy! You need not be in such a hurry," cried the soldier to him. "There will be nothing to see till I come. But if you will run to the house where I have been living and bring me my Tinder-Box, you shall have 4 shillings. But you must put your best foot foremost." The shoemaker's boy liked the idea of getting the 4 shillings, so he ran very fast and fetched the Tinder-Box and gave it to the soldier. And now we shall see what happened. Outside the town, a large gibbet had been erected, round which stood the soldiers and several thousands of people. The king and the queen sat on splendid thrones opposite to the judges and the whole council. The soldier already stood on the ladder, but as they were about to place the rope around his neck, he said that an innocent request was often granted to a poor criminal before he suffered death. He wished very much to smoke a pipe, as it would be the last pipe he should ever smoke in the world. The king could not refuse this request, so the soldier took his Tinder-Box and struck fire, once, twice, thrice, and there in a moment stood all the dogs. the one with eyes as big as teacups, the one with eyes as large as mill wheels, and the third, whose eyes were like towers. "Help me now, that I may not be hanged," cried the soldier. And the dogs fell upon the judges and all the counselors, seized one by the legs and another by the nose, and tossed them many feet high in the air, so that they fell down and were dashed to pieces. "I will not be touched," said the king. But the largest dog seized him, as well as the queen, and threw them after the others. Then the soldiers and all the people were afraid, and cried, "Good soldier, you shall be our king, and you shall marry the beautiful princess." So they placed the soldier in the king's carriage, and the 3 dogs ran on in front and cried, "Hurrah!" And the little boys whistled through their fingers, and the soldiers presented arms. The princess came out of the copper castle and became queen, which was very pleasing to her. The wedding festivities lasted a whole week, and the dogs sat at the table and stared with all their eyes. Little Claus and Big Claus. In a village, there once lived 2 men who had the same name. They were both called Claus. One of them had 4 horses, but the other had only 1. So, to distinguish them, people called the owner of the 4 horses Great Claus, and he who had only 1, Little Claus. Now we shall hear what happened to them, for this is a true story. Through the whole week, Little Claus was obliged to plow for Great Claus and lend him his 1 horse. And once a week, on a Sunday, Great Claus lent him all his 4 horses. Then, how Little Claus would smack his whip over all 5 horses. They were as good as his own on that one day. The sun shone brightly, and the church bells were ringing merrily as the people passed by, dressed in their best clothes, with their prayer books under their arms. They were going to hear the clergyman preach. They looked at Little Claus plowing with his 5 horses, and he was so proud that he smacked his whip and said, "Gee up, my 5 horses." "You must not say that," said Big Claus, "for only one of them belongs to you." But Little Claus soon forgot what he ought to say, and when anyone passed, he would call out, "Gee up, my 5 horses." "Now I must beg you not to say that again," said Big Claus, "for if you do, I shall hit your horse on the head so that he will drop dead on the spot, and there will be an end of him. I promise you, I will not say it any more," said the other. But as soon as people came by, nodding to him and wishing him good day, he became so pleased and thought how grand it looked to have 5 horses plowing in his field that he cried out again, "Gee up, all my horses." "I'll gee up your horses for you," said Big Claus, and seizing a hammer, he struck the one horse of little Claus on the head, and he fell dead instantly. "Oh, now I have no horse at all," said little Claus, weeping. But after a while, he took off the dead horse's skin and hung the hide to dry in the wind. Then he put the dry skin into a bag and, placing it over his shoulder, went out into the next town to sell the horse's skin. He had a very long way to go and had to pass through a dark, gloomy forest. Presently, a storm arose, and he lost his way. And before he discovered the right path, evening came on, and it was still a long way to the town, and too far to return home before night. Near the road stood a large farmhouse. The shutters outside the windows were closed, but lights shone through the crevices at the top. "I might get permission to stay here for the night," thought little Claus. So he went up to the door and knocked. The farmer's wife opened the door, but when she heard what he wanted, she told him to go away, as her husband would not allow her to admit strangers. "Then I shall be obliged to lie out here," said little Claus to himself, as the farmer's wife shut the door in his face. Near to the farmhouse stood a large haystack, and between it and the house was a small shed with a thatched roof. "I can lie up there," said little Claus as he saw the roof. "It will make a famous bed, but I hope the stork will not fly down and bite my legs." For on it stood a living stork, whose nest was in the roof. So little Claus climbed to the roof of the shed, and while he turned himself to get comfortable, he discovered that the wooden shutters, which were closed, did not reach to the tops of the windows of the farmhouse, so that he could see into a room in which a large table was laid out with wine, roast meat, and a splendid fish. The farmer's wife and the sexton were sitting at the table together, and she filled his glass and helped him plenteously to fish, which appeared to be his favorite dish. "If I could only get some too," thought little Claus. And then, as he stretched his neck towards the window, he spied a large, beautiful pie. Indeed, they had a glorious feast before them. At this moment, he heard someone riding down the road towards the farmhouse. It was the farmer returning home. He was a good man, but still, he had a very strange prejudice. He could not bear the sight of a sexton. If one appeared before him, he would put himself in a terrible rage. In consequence of this dislike, the sexton had gone to visit the farmer's wife during her husband's absence from home, and the good woman had placed before him the best she had in the house to eat. When she heard the farmer coming, she was frightened and begged the sexton to hide himself in a large, empty chest that stood in the room. He did so, for he knew her husband could not endure the sight of a sexton. The woman then quickly put away the wine and hid all the rest of the nice things in the oven. For if her husband had seen them, he would have asked what they were brought out for. "Oh, dear," sighed little Claus from the top of the shed, as he saw all the good things disappear. "Is anyone up there?" asked the farmer, looking up and discovering little Claus. "Why are you lying up there? Come down and come into the house with me." So little Claus came down and told the farmer how he had lost his way and begged for a night's lodging. "All right," said the farmer, "but we must have something to eat first." The woman received them both very kindly, laid the cloth on a large table, and placed before them a dish of porridge. The farmer was very hungry and ate his porridge with a good appetite, but little Claus could not help thinking of the nice roast meat, fish, and pies, which he knew were in the oven. Under the table, at his feet, lay the sack containing the horse's skin, which he intended to sell at the next town. Now little Claus did not relish the porridge at all, so he trod with his foot on the sack under the table, and the dry skin squeaked quite loud. "Hush," said little Claus to his sack, at the same time treading upon it again, till it squeaked louder than before. "Hello, what have you got in your sack?" asked the farmer. "Oh, it is a conjurer," said little Claus, "and he says we need not eat porridge, for he has conjured the oven full of roast meat, fish, and pie." "Wonderful!" cried the farmer, starting up and opening the oven door. And there lay all the nice things hidden by the farmer's wife, but which he supposed had been conjured there by the wizard under the table. The woman dared not say anything, so she placed the things before them, and they both ate of the fish, the meat, and the pastry. Then little Claus trod again upon his sack, and it squeaked as before. "What does he say now?" asked the farmer. "He says," replied little Claus, "that there are 3 bottles of wine for us, standing in the corner by the oven." So the woman was obliged to bring out the wine also, which she had hidden, and the farmer drank it till he became quite merry. He would have liked such a conjurer as little Claus carried in his sack. "Could he conjure up the evil one?" asked the farmer. "I should like to see him now, while I am so merry." "Oh, yes," replied little Claus. "My conjurer can do anything I ask him. Can you not?" he asked, treading at the same time on the sack till it squeaked. "Do you hear?" He answers, "Yes, but he fears that we shall not like to look at him." "Oh, I am not afraid. What will he be like?" "Well, he is very much like a sexton." "Ha," said the farmer, "then he must be ugly. Do you know I cannot endure the sight of a sexton? However, that doesn't matter. I shall know who it is, so I shall not mind. Now then, I have got up my courage, but don't let him come too near me." "Stop, "I must ask the conjurer," said little Claus. So he trod on the bag and stooped his ear down to listen. "What does he say?" "He says that you must go and open that large chest which stands in the corner, and you will see the evil one crouching down inside. But you must hold the lid firmly, that he may not slip out. Will you come and help me hold it?" said the farmer, going towards the chest in which his wife had hidden the sexton, who now lay inside, very much frightened. The farmer opened the lid a very little way and peeped in. "Oh," cried he, springing backwards, "I saw him, and he is exactly like our sexton. How dreadful it is." So after that, he was obliged to drink again, and they sat and drank till far into the night. "You must sell your conjurer to me," said the farmer. "Ask as much as you like. I will pay it. Indeed, I would give you directly a whole bushel of gold." "No, indeed, I cannot," said little Claus. "Only think how much profit I could make out of this conjurer." "But I should like to have him," said the fanner, still continuing his entreaties. "Well," said little Claus at length, "you have been so good as to give me a night's lodging. I will not refuse you. You shall have the conjurer for a bushel of money, but I will have quite full measure." "So you shall," said the farmer, "but you must take away the chest as well. I would not have it in the house another hour. There is no knowing if he may not be still there." So little Claus gave the farmer the sack containing the dried horse's skin, and received in exchange a bushel of money full measure. The farmer also gave him a wheelbarrow on which to carry away the chest and the gold. "Farewell," said little Claus, as he went off with his money and the great chest, in which the sexton lay still concealed. On one side of the forest was a broad, deep river. The water flowed so rapidly that very few were able to swim against the stream. A new bridge had lately been built across it, and in the middle of this bridge, little Claus stopped and said, loud enough to be heard by the sexton, "Now what shall I do with this stupid chest? It is as heavy as if it were full of stones. I shall be tired if I roll it any farther, so I may as well throw it in the river. If it swims after me to my house, well and good, and if not, it will not much matter." So he seized the chest in his hand and lifted it up a little, as if he were going to throw it into the water. "No, leave it alone," cried the sexton from within the chest. "Let me out first." "Oh," exclaimed little Claus, pretending to be frightened. "He is in there still, is he? I must throw him into the river, that he may be drowned." "Oh no, oh no," cried the sexton. I will give you a whole bushel full of money if you will let me go." "Why, that is another matter," said little Claus, opening the chest. The sexton crept out, pushed the empty chest into the water, and went to his house. Then he measured out a whole bushel full of gold for little Claus, who had already received one from the farmer, so that now he had a barrow full. "I have been well paid for my horse," said he to himself when he reached home, entered his own room, and emptied all his money into a heap on the floor. How vexed Great Claus will be when he finds out how rich I have become, all through my one horse. But I shall not tell him exactly how it all happened. Then he sent a boy to Great Claus to borrow a bushel measure. What can he want it for? Thought Great Claus. So he smeared the bottom of the measure with tar, that some of whatever was put into it might stick there and remain. And so it happened. For when the measure returned, 3 new silver florins were sticking to it. "What does this mean?" said Great Claus. So he ran off directly to Little Claus and asked, "Where did you get so much money?" "Oh, for my horse's skin. I sold it yesterday." "It was certainly well paid for then," said Great Claus. And he ran home to his house, seized a hatchet, and knocked all his 4 horses on the head, flayed off their skins, and took them to the town to sell. "Skins, skins, who'll buy skins?" he cried as he went through the streets. All the shoemakers and tanners came running and asked how much he wanted for them. "A bushel of money for each," replied Great Claus. "Are you mad?" they all cried. "Do you think we have money to spend by the bushel?" "Skins, skins," he cried again. "Who will buy skins?" But to all who inquired the price, his answer was, "A bushel of money." "He is making fools of us," said they all. Then the shoemakers took their straps, and the tanners their leather aprons, and began to beat Great Claus. "Skins, skins," they cried, mocking him. "Yes, we'll mark your skin for you, till it is black and blue." "Out of the town with him," said they. And Great Claus was obliged to run as fast as he could. He had never before been so thoroughly beaten. "Ah," said he, as he came to his house, "Little Claus shall pay me for this. I will beat him to death." Meanwhile, the old grandmother of Little Claus died. She had been cross, unkind, and really spiteful to him. But he was very sorry, and took the dead woman and laid her in his warm bed to see if he could bring her to life again. There he determined that she should lie the whole night, while he seated himself in a chair in a corner of the room, as he had often done before. During the night, as he sat there, the door opened, and in came Great Claus with a hatchet, He knew well where Little Claus's bed stood, so he went right up to it and struck the old grandmother on the head, thinking it must be Little Claus. "There," cried he, "now you cannot make a fool of me again." And then he went home. "That is a very wicked man," thought Little Claus. "He meant to kill me. It is a good thing for my old grandmother that she was already dead, or he would have taken her life." Then he dressed his old grandmother in her best clothes, borrowed a horse of his neighbor, and harnessed it to a cart. Then he placed the old woman on the back seat, so that she might not fall out as he drove, and rode away through the wood. By sunrise, they reached a large inn, where Little Claus stopped and went to get something to eat. The landlord was a rich man, and a good man too, but as passionate as if he had been made of pepper and snuff. "Good morning," said he to Little Claus. "You are come betimes today." "Yes," said Little Claus. "I am going to the town with my old grandmother. She is sitting at the back of the wagon, but I cannot bring her into the room. Will you take her a glass of mead? But you must speak very loud, for she cannot hear well." "Yes, certainly I will," replied the landlord, and pouring out a glass of mead, he carried it out to the dead grandmother, who sat upright in the cart. "Here is a glass of mead from your grandson," said the landlord. The dead woman did not answer a word, but sat quite still. "Do you not hear?" cried the landlord as loud as he could. "Here is a glass of mead from your grandson." Again and again he bawled it out, but as she did not stir, he flew into a passion and threw the glass of mead in her face. It struck her on the nose, and she fell backwards out of the cart, for she was only seated there, not tied in. "Hello," cried Little Claus, rushing out of the door and seizing hold of the landlord by the throat. "You have killed my grandmother. See, here is a great hole in her forehead." "Oh, how unfortunate," said the landlord, wringing his hands. "This all comes of my fiery temper. Dear Little Claus, I will give you a bushel of money. I will bury your grandmother as if she were my own. Only keep silent, or else they will cut off my head, and that would be disagreeable." So it happened that Little Claus received another bushel of money, and the landlord buried his old grandmother as if she had been his own. When Little Claus reached home again, he immediately sent a boy to Great Claus, requesting him to lend him a bushel measure. "How is this?" thought Great Claus. "Did I not kill him? I must go and see for myself." So he went to Little Claus and took the bushel measure with him. "How did you get all this money?" asked Great Claus, staring with wide-open eyes at his neighbor's treasures. "You killed my grandmother instead of me," said Little Claus. so I have sold her for a bushel of money. That is a good price at all events, said Great Claus. So he went home, took a hatchet, and killed his old grandmother with one blow. Then he placed her on a cart and drove into the town to the apothecary and asked him if he would buy a dead body. "Whose is it? And where did you get it?" asked the apothecary. "It is my grandmother," he replied. "I killed her with a blow that I might get a bushel of money for her." "Heaven preserve us!" cried the apothecary. "You are out of your mind. Don't say such things, or you will lose your head." And then he talked to him seriously about the wicked deed he had done, and told him that such a wicked man would surely be punished. Great Claus got so frightened that he rushed out of the surgery, jumped into the cart, whipped up his horses, and drove home quickly. The apothecary and all the people thought him mad and let him drive where he liked. "You shall pay for this," said Great Claus, as soon as he got into the high road. "That you shall, Little Claus." So as soon as he reached home, he took the largest sack he could find and went over to Little Claus. "You have played me another trick," said he. "First, I killed all my horses, and then my old grandmother, and it is all your fault. But you shall not make a fool of me any more." So he laid hold of Little Claus round the body and pushed him into the sack, which he took on his shoulders, saying, "Now I'm going to drown you in the river." He had a long way to go before he reached the river, and Little Claus was not a very light weight to carry. The road led by the church, and as they passed, he could hear the organ playing and the people singing beautifully. Great Claus put down the sack close to the church door and thought he might as well go in and hear a psalm before he went any farther. Little Claus could not possibly get out of the sack, and all the people were in church. So in he went. "Oh dear," sighed Little Claus in the sack, as he turned and twisted about. But he found he could not loosen the string with which it was tied. Presently, an old cattle driver with snowy hair passed by, carrying a large staff in his hand, with which he drove a large herd of cows and oxen before him. They stumbled against the sack in which lay Little Claus and turned it over. "Oh dear," sighed Little Claus. "I am very young, yet I am soon going to heaven." "And I, poor fellow," said the drover, "I who am so old already, cannot get there." "Open the sack," cried Little Claus. "Creep into it instead of me, and you will soon be there." "With all my heart," replied the drover, opening the sack, from which sprung Little Claus as quickly as possible. "Will you take care of my cattle?" said the old man, as he crept into the bag. "Yes," said Little Claus, and he tied up the sack, and then walked off with all the cows and oxen. When Great Claus came out of church, he took up the sack and placed it on his shoulders. It appeared to have become lighter, for the old drover was not half so heavy as Little Claus. "How light he seems now," said he. "Ah, it is because I have been to a church." So he walked on to the river, which was deep and broad, and threw the sack containing the old drover into the water, believing it to be Little Claus. "There you may lie," he exclaimed. "You will play me no more tricks now." Then he turned to go home. But when he came to a place where two roads crossed, there was Little Claus driving the cattle. "How is this?" said Great Claus. "Did I not drown you just now?" "Yes," said Little Claus. "You threw me into the river about half an hour ago." "But wherever did you get all these fine beasts?" asked Great Claus. "These beasts are sea cattle," replied Little Claus. "I'll tell you the whole story, and thank you for drowning me. I am above you now. I am really very rich. I was frightened, to be sure, while I lay tied up in the sack, and the wind whistled in my ears when you threw me into the river from the bridge, and I sank to the bottom immediately. But I did not hurt myself, for I fell a piece of beautifully soft grass which grows down there, and in a moment the sack opened, and the sweetest little maiden came towards me. She had snow-white robes and a wreath of green leaves on her wet hair. She took me by the hand and said, "So you are come, Little Claus, and here are some cattle for you to begin with. About a mile farther on the road, there is another herd for you." Then I saw that the river formed a great highway for the people who live in the sea. They were walking and driving here and there from the sea to the land at the spot where the river terminates. The bed of the river was covered with the loveliest flowers and sweet, fresh grass. The fish swam past me as rapidly as the birds do here in the air. How handsome all the people were, and what fine cattle were grazing on the hills and in the valleys. "But why did you come up again?" said Great Claus. "If it was all so beautiful down there, I should not have done so." "Well," said Little Claus, "it was good policy on my part. You heard me say just now that I was told by the Sea Maiden to go a mile farther on the road, and I should find a whole herd of cattle. By the road she meant the river, for she could not travel any other way. But I knew the winding of the river, and how it bends, sometimes to the right and sometimes to the left, and it seemed a long way. So I chose a shorter one, and by coming up to the land and then driving across the fields back again to the river, I shall save half a mile and get all my cattle more quickly." "What a lucky fellow you are," exclaimed Great Claus. "Do you think I should get any sea cattle if I went down to the bottom of the river?" "Yes, I think so," said little Claus. "But I cannot carry you there in a sack. You are too heavy. However, if you will go there first, and then creep into a sack, I will throw you in with the greatest pleasure." "Thank you," said Great Claus. "But remember, if I do not get any sea cattle down there, I shall come up again and give you a good thrashing." "No, now don't be too fierce about it," said little Claus as they walked on towards the river. When they approached it, the cattle, who were very thirsty, saw the stream and ran down to drink. "See what a hurry they are in," said little Claus. "They are longing to get down again. Come, help me. Make haste," said Great Claus, "or you'll get beaten." So he crept into a large sack, which had been lying across the back of one of the oxen. "Put in a stone," said Great Claus, "or I may not sink." "Oh, there's not much fear of that," he replied. Still, he put a large stone into the bag, and then tied it tightly and gave it a push. Plump! In went Great Claus, and immediately sank to the bottom of the river. "I'm afraid he will not find any cattle," said little Claus, and then he drove his own beasts homewards. The Princess and the Pea. Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom surrounded by mountains and meadows, there lived a young prince who longed to marry a princess. But not just any princess. She had to be a real one, born of grace and truth, whose heart was as noble as her crown. He set out upon a grand journey to find her, traveling across seas and forests, through bustling cities and quiet valleys, visiting courts where music played and laughter filled the air. Many princesses he met indeed, some dazzling with jewels, some gentle in speech, yet none seemed quite right. There was always something a little off, a shadow behind their smiles, or a note of vanity in their words. "Perhaps I ask too much," he would whisper to himself. Yet deep inside, he knew he sought not perfection, but authenticity. And so, after many months of wandering, he returned home, weary and heartsick. For though the world was vast, he had not found what he truly desired. One evening, as the prince sat gazing out of the palace window, the skies grew dark and heavy. A storm rolled in with great fury. Lightning split the heavens. Thunder roared like drums of war, and the rain came down in sheets so thick that the castle towers vanished behind a curtain of silver water. The wind howled through the gates, shaking the great doors as if some spirit sought entry. Then came a knocking, timid at first, then louder. The old king, kind though cautious, went himself to open the gate. And there stood a young woman, drenched from head to toe. Her hair clung to her cheeks, Her gown was torn and muddy, and her shoes squelched with every step. Yet even through her disarray, there was a certain light in her eyes, calm, proud, and unshaken by the storm. "I am a princess," she said softly, "and I have lost my way. Might I have shelter for the night?" The old queen, wise and perceptive, looked at her closely. A real princess, she wondered. Appearances could deceive, and many had claimed such titles before. "We shall see," she thought, with a small, knowing smile. She ordered a room prepared, but in her heart she devised a quiet little test, one known only to her. While the servants dried the young woman's clothes and set a warm fire by her bedside, the queen entered the chamber herself. She stripped the bed bare, right down to the frame, and upon the wooden slats she placed a single green pea. Then she called for 20 mattresses to be stacked high, one upon another, soft as clouds. And on top of them, she laid 20 feather beds, so thick and downy that they seemed fit for dreams themselves. "Let us see," she murmured, "if she truly has the delicacy of royal blood." That night, the princess climbed the towering bed with the help of a small ladder. She thanked the servants politely, lay down, and closed her eyes as the rain still whispered against the windows. When morning came, the queen entered the room and greeted her guest with a smile. "Did you rest well, my dear?" "Oh, not at all," the princess exclaimed, rubbing her eyes. "I scarcely slept a wink. Something hard was pressing beneath me all night. I'm sure of it. My body aches, as if I had lain upon stones. What could possibly be in that bed?" The queen's eyes sparkled. Indeed, she thought, only a true princess could feel a pea through 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds. For such delicate sensitivity could come only from one raised in gentleness, in a heart attuned to the slightest discomfort of the world. The prince was overjoyed. He had searched the earth for a real princess, and now, by the simplest of tests, he had found her, not in splendor or ceremony, but in humility and truth. Her grace had been proven not by jewels or words, but by the quiet honesty of her heart. And so, in time, he took her hand in marriage. Bells rang throughout the kingdom, and the people rejoiced, for the prince had found the one who was truly his equal. As for the little pea, it was carefully placed in a crystal case and set in the Royal Museum, where it can still be seen to this very day, unless, of course, someone has stolen it. And that, dear reader, is a true story, as true as the feeling of a pea beneath 20 mattresses, and the tenderness of a heart that can still feel what others cannot. little Ida's flowers. My poor flowers are quite dead, said little Ida. They were so pretty yesterday evening, and now all the leaves are hanging down, quite withered. What do they do that for? She asked of the student who sat on the sofa. She liked him very much. He could tell the most amusing stories and cut out the prettiest pictures, hearts and ladies dancing, castles with doors that opened, as well as flowers. He was a delightful student. Why do the flowers look so faded today? She asked again, and pointed to her nosegay, which was quite withered. Don't you know what is the matter with them? Said the student. The flowers were at a ball last night, and therefore it is no wonder they hang their heads. But flowers cannot dance? Cried little Ida. Yes, indeed, they can, replied the student. When it grows dark and everybody is asleep, they jump about quite merrily. They have a ball almost every night. Can children go to these balls? Yes, said the student. Little daisies and lilies of the valley. Where do the beautiful flowers dance? Asked little Ida. Have you not often seen the large castle outside the gates of the town, where the king lives in summer, and where the beautiful garden is full of flowers? And have you not fed the swans with bread when they swam towards you? Well, the flowers have capital balls there, believe me. I was in the garden out there yesterday with my mother, said Ida, but all the leaves were off the trees, and there was not a single flower left. Where are they? I used to see so many in the summer. They are in the castle, replied the student. You must know that as soon as the king and all the court are gone into the town, the flowers run out of the garden into the castle, and you should see how merry they are. The two most beautiful roses seat themselves on the throne and are called the King and Queen. Then all the red coxcombs range themselves on each side and bow. These are the lords in waiting. After that, the pretty flowers come in, and there is a grand ball. The blue violets represent little naval cadets and dance with hyacinths and crocuses, which they call young ladies. The tulips and tiger lilies are the old ladies who sit and watch the dancing, so that everything may be conducted with order and propriety. But, said little Ida, is there no one there to hurt the flowers for dancing in the king's castle? No one knows anything about it, said the student. The old steward of the castle, who has to watch there at night, sometimes comes in, but he carries a great bunch of keys, and as soon as the flowers hear the keys rattle, they run and hide themselves behind the long curtains and stand quite still, just peeping their heads out. Then the old steward says, I smell flowers here, but he cannot see them. Oh, how capital, said little Ida, clapping her hands. "Should I be able to see these flowers?" "Yes," said the student. "Mind you think of it the next time you go out. No doubt you will see them if you peep through the window. I did so today, and I saw a long yellow lily lying stretched out on the sofa. She was a court lady." "Can the flowers from the botanical gardens go to these balls?" asked Ida. "It is such a distance." "Oh, yes," said the student, "whenever they like, for they can fly. Have you not seen those beautiful red, white, and yellow butterflies that look like flowers? They were flowers once. They have flown off their stalks into the air and flap their leaves as if they were little wings to make them fly. Then, if they behave well, they obtain permission to fly about during the day, instead of being obliged to sit still on their stems at home. And so, in time, their leaves become real wings. It may be, however, that the flowers in the botanical gardens have never been to the king's palace, and therefore they know nothing of the merry doings at night, which take place there. I will tell you what to do, and the botanical professor, who lives close by here, will be so surprised. You know him very well, do you not? Well, next time you go into his garden, you must tell one of the flowers that there is going to be a grand ball at the castle. Then that flower will tell all the others, and they will fly away to the castle as soon as possible. And when the professor walks into his garden, there will not be a single flower left. How he will wonder what has become of them. But how can one flower tell another? Flowers cannot speak? No, certainly not, replied the student. But they can make signs. Have you not often seen that when the wind blows, they nod at one another and rustle all their green leaves? Can the professor understand the signs? Asked Ida. Yes, to be sure he can. He went one morning into his garden and saw a stinging nettle making signs with its leaves to a beautiful red carnation. It was saying, "You are so pretty. I like you very much." But the professor did not approve of such nonsense, so he clapped his hands on the nettle to stop it. Then the leaves, which are its fingers, stung him so sharply that he has never ventured to touch a nettle since. "Oh, how funny," said Ida, and she laughed. "How can anyone put such notions into a child's head?" said a tiresome lawyer who had come to pay a visit and sat on the sofa. He did not like the student and would grumble when he saw him cutting out droll or amusing pictures. Sometimes it would be a man hanging on a gibbet and holding a heart in his hand, as if he had been stealing hearts. Sometimes it was an old witch riding through the air on a broom and carrying her husband on her nose. But the lawyer did not like such jokes, and he would say, as he had just said, "How can anyone put such nonsense into a child's head? What absurd fancies there are." But to little Ida, all these stories which the student told her about the flowers seemed very droll, and she thought over them a great deal. The flowers did hang their heads because they had been dancing all night and were very tired, and most likely they were ill. Then she took them into the room where a number of toys lay on a pretty little table, and the whole of the table drawer, besides, was full of beautiful things. Her doll, Sophie, lay in the doll's bed asleep, and little Ida said to her, "You must really get up, Sophie, and be content to lie in the drawer tonight. The poor flowers are ill, and they must lie in your bed. Then perhaps they will get well again." So she took the doll out, who looked quite cross and said not a single word, for she was angry at being turned out of her bed. Ida placed the flowers in the doll's bed and drew the quilt over them. Then she told them to lie quite still and be good, while she made some tea for them, so that they might be quite well and able to get up the next morning. And she drew the curtains close round the little bed, so that the sun might not shine in their eyes. During the whole evening, she could not help thinking of what the student had told her. And before she went to bed herself, she was obliged to peep behind the curtains into the garden, where all her mother's beautiful flowers grew, hyacinths and tulips and many others. Then she whispered to them, quite softly, "I know you are going to a ball tonight." But the flowers appeared as if they did not understand, and not a leaf moved. Still, Ida felt quite sure she knew all about it. She lay awake a long time after she was in bed, thinking how pretty it must be to see all the beautiful flowers dancing in the king's garden. "I wonder if my flowers have really been there," she said to herself, and then she fell asleep. In the night, she awoke. She had been dreaming of the flowers and of the student, as well as of the tiresome lawyer who found fault with him. It was quite still in Ida's bedroom. The night lamp burnt on the table, and her father and mother were asleep. "I wonder if my flowers are still lying in Sophie's bed," she thought to herself. "How much I should like to know." She raised herself a little and glanced at the door of the room where all her flowers and playthings lay. It was partly open, and as she listened, it seemed as if someone in the room was playing the piano, but softly and more prettily than she had ever before heard it. "Now, all the flowers are certainly dancing in there," she thought. "Oh, how much I should like to see them." But she did not dare move for fear of disturbing her father and mother. "If they would only come in here," she thought. But they did not come, and the music continued to play so beautifully and was so pretty that she could resist no longer. She crept out of her little bed, went softly to the door, and looked into the room. Oh, what a splendid sight there was, to be sure. There was no night lamp burning, but the room appeared quite light, for the moon shone through the window upon the floor and made it almost like day. All the hyacinths and tulips stood in 2 long rows down the room. Not a single flower remained in the window, and the flower pots were all empty. The flowers were dancing gracefully on the floor, making turns and holding each other by their long green leaves as they swung round. At the piano sat a large yellow lily, which little Ida was sure she had seen in the summer, for she remembered the student saying she was very much like Miss Lena, one of Ida's friends. They all laughed at him then, but now it seemed to little Ida as if the tall, yellow flower was really like the young lady. She had just the same manners while playing, bending her long yellow face from side to side and nodding in time to the beautiful music. Then she saw a large purple crocus jump into the middle of the table where the playthings stood, go up to the doll's bedstead, and draw back the curtains. There lay the sick flowers, but they got up directly and nodded to the others as a sign that they wished to dance with them. The old, rough doll, with the broken mouth, stood up and bowed to the pretty flowers. They did not look ill at all now, but jumped about and were very merry, yet none of them noticed little Ida. Presently, it seemed as if something fell from the table. Ida looked that way and saw a slight carnival rod jumping down among the flowers as if it belonged to them. It was, however, very smooth and neat, and a little wax doll with a broad-brimmed hat on her head, like the one worn by the lawyer, sat upon it. The carnival rod hopped about among the flowers on its 3 red, stilted feet, and stamped quite loud when it danced the mazurka. The flowers could not perform this dance. They were too light to stamp in that manner. All at once, the wax doll, which rode on the carnival rod, seemed to grow larger and taller, and it turned round and said to the paper flowers, "How can you put such things in a child's head? They are all foolish fancies." And then the doll was exactly like the lawyer, with the broad-brimmed hat, and looked as yellow and as cross as he did. But the paper dolls struck him on his thin legs, and he shrunk up again and became quite a little wax doll. This was very amusing, and Ida could not help laughing. The carnival rod went on dancing, and the lawyer was obliged to dance also. It was no use. He might make himself great and tall, or remain a little wax doll with a large black hat. Still, he must dance. Then at last the other flowers interceded for him, especially those who had lain in the doll's bed, and the carnival rod gave up his dancing. At the same moment, a loud knocking was heard in the drawer, where Ida's doll Sophie lay, with many other toys. Then the rough doll ran to the end of the table, laid himself flat down upon it, and began to pull the drawer out a little way. Then Sophie raised himself and looked round, quite astonished. "There must be a ball here tonight," said Sophie. "Why did not somebody tell me?" "Will you dance with me?" said the rough doll. "You are the right sort to dance with, certainly," said she, turning her back upon him. Then she seated herself on the edge of the drawer, and thought that perhaps one of the flowers would ask her to dance. But none of them came. Then she coughed, "Hem, hem, ahem." But for all that, not one came. The shabby doll now danced quite alone, and not very badly, after all. As none of the flowers seemed to notice Sophie, she let herself down from the drawer to the floor, so as to make a very great noise. All the flowers came round her directly, and asked if she had hurt herself, especially those who had lain in her bed. But she was not hurt at all, and Ida's flowers thanked her for the use of the nice bed, and were very kind to her. They led her into the middle of the room, where the moon shone, and danced with her, while all the other flowers formed a circle round them. Then Sophie was very happy, and said they might keep her bed. She did not mind lying in the drawer at all. But the flowers thanked her very much, and said, "We cannot live long. Tomorrow morning we shall be quite dead, and you must tell little Ida to bury us in the garden, near to the grave of the canary. Then, in the summer, we shall wake up and be more beautiful than ever. No, you must not die," said Sophie, as she kissed the flowers. Then the door of the room opened, and a number of beautiful flowers danced in. Ida could not imagine where they could come from, unless they were the flowers from the king's garden. First came 2 lovely roses, with little golden crowns on their heads. These were the king and queen. Beautiful stalks and carnations followed, bowing to everyone present. They had also music with them. Large poppies and peonies had pea shells for instruments, and blew into them till they were quite red in the face. The bunches of blue hyacinths and the little white snowdrops jingled their bell-like flowers, as if they were real bells. Then came many more flowers: blue violets, purple heart's ease, daisies, and lilies of the valley. And they all danced together and kissed each other. It was very beautiful to behold. At last, the flowers wished each other good night. Then little Ida crept back into her bed again, and dreamt of all she had seen. When she arose the next morning, she went quickly to the little table to see if the flowers were still there. She drew aside the curtains of the little bed. There they all lay, but quite faded, much more so than the day before. Sophie was lying in the drawer where Ida had placed her, but she looked very sleepy. "Do you remember what the flowers told you to say to me?" said little Ida. But Sophie looked quite stupid and said not a single word. "You are not kind at all," said Ida. "And yet they all danced with you." Then she took a little paper box on which were painted beautiful birds and laid the dead flowers in it. "This shall be your pretty coffin," she said. "And by, when my cousins come to visit me, they shall help me to bury you out in the garden, so that next summer you may grow up again more beautiful than ever." Her cousins were two good-tempered boys whose names were James and Adolphus. Their father had given them each a bow and arrow, and they had brought them to show Ida. She told them about the poor flowers, which were dead, and as soon as they obtained permission, they went with her to bury them. The two boys walked first, with their crossbows on their shoulders, and little Ida followed, carrying the pretty box containing the dead flowers. They dug a little grave in the garden. Ida kissed her flowers and then laid them, with the box, in the earth. James and Adolphus then fired their crossbows over the grave, as they had neither guns nor cannons. Thumbelina. There was once a woman who wished very much to have a little child, but she could not obtain her wish. At last she went to a fairy and said, "I should so very much like to have a little child. Can you tell me where I can find one?" "Oh, that can be easily managed," said the fairy. "Here is a barley corn of a different kind to those which grow in the farmers' fields, and which the chickens eat. Put it into a flower pot and see what will happen." "Thank you," said the woman, and she gave the fairy 12 shillings, which was the price of the barley corn. Then she went home and planted it, and immediately there grew up a large, handsome flower, something like a tulip in appearance, but with its leaves tightly closed, as if it were still a bud. "It is a beautiful flower," said the woman, and she kissed the red and golden-colored leaves. And while she did so, the flower opened, and she could see that it was a real tulip. Within the flower, upon the green velvet stamens, sat a very delicate and graceful little maiden. She was scarcely half as long as a thumb, and they gave her the name of Thumbelina, or Tiny, because she was so small. A walnut shell, elegantly polished, served her for a cradle. Her bed was formed of blue violet leaves, with a rose leaf for a counterpane. Here she slept at night, But during the day, she amused herself on a table where the woman had placed a plateful of water. Round this plate were wreaths of flowers with their stems in the water, and upon it floated a large tulip leaf, which served Tiny for a boat. Here the little maiden sat and rowed herself from side to side with 2 oars made of white horsehair. It really was a very pretty sight. Tiny could also sing so softly and sweetly that nothing like her singing had ever before been heard. One night, while she lay in her pretty bed, a large, ugly, wet toad crept through a broken pane of glass in the window and leaped right upon the table where Tiny lay sleeping under her rose-leaf quilt. "What a pretty little wife this would make for my son," said the toad, and she took up the walnut shell in which little Tiny lay asleep and jumped through the window with it into the garden. In the swampy margin of a broad stream in the garden lived the toad with her son. He was uglier even than his mother, and when he saw the pretty little maiden in her elegant bed, he could only cry, "Croak, croak, croak." "Don't speak so loud, or she will wake," said the toad, "and then she might run away, for she is as light as swans. Down. We will place her on one of the water lily leaves out in the stream. It will be like an island to her. She is so light and small. And then she cannot escape. And while she is away, we will make haste and prepare the stateroom under the marsh in which you are to live when you are married." Far out in the stream grew a number of water lilies with broad green leaves which seemed to float on the top of the water. The largest of these leaves appeared farther off than the rest, and the old toad swam out to it with the walnut shell, in which little Tiny lay still asleep. The tiny little creature woke very early in the morning and began to cry bitterly when she found where she was, for she could see nothing but water on every side of the large green leaf, and no way of reaching the land. Meanwhile, the old toad was very busy under the marsh, decking her room with rushes and wild yellow flowers to make it look pretty for her new daughter-in-law. Then she swam out with her ugly son to the leaf on which she had placed poor little Tiny. She wanted to fetch the pretty bed, that she might put it in the bridal chamber to be ready for her. The old toad bowed low to her in the water and said, "Here is my son. He will be your husband, and you will live happily in the marsh by the stream." Croak, 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 was all her son could say for himself. So the toad took up the elegant little bed and swam away with it, leaving Tiny all alone on the green leaf, where she sat and wept. She could not bear to think of living with the old toad and having her ugly son for a husband. The little fishes who swam about in the water beneath had seen the toad and heard what she said. So they lifted their heads above the water to look at the little maiden. As soon as they caught sight of her, they saw she was very pretty, and it made them very sorry to think that she must go and live with the ugly toads. No, it must never be. So they assembled together in the water, round the green stalk which held the leaf on which the little maiden stood, and gnawed it away at the root with their teeth. Then the leaf floated down the stream, carrying Tiny far away out of reach of land. Tiny sailed past many towns, and the little birds in the bushes saw her and sang, "What a lovely little creature." So the leaf swam away with her farther and farther, till it brought her to other lands. A graceful little white butterfly constantly fluttered round her, and at last alighted on the leaf. Tiny pleased him, and she was glad of it, for now the toad could not possibly reach her, and the country through which she sailed was beautiful, and the sun shone upon the water till it glittered like liquid gold. She took off her girdle and tied one end of it round the butterfly, and the other end of the ribbon she fastened to the leaf, which now glided on much faster than ever, taking little Tiny with it as she stood. Presently, a large cockchafer flew by. The moment he caught sight of her, he seized her round her delicate waist with his claws, and flew with her into a tree. The green leaf floated away on the brook, and the butterfly flew with it, for he was fastened to it, and could not get away. Oh, how frightened little Tiny felt when the cockchafer flew with her to the tree. But especially was she sorry for the beautiful white butterfly which she had fastened to the leaf. For if he could not free himself, he would die of hunger. But the cockchafer did not trouble himself at all about the matter. He seated himself by her side on a large green leaf, gave her some honey from the flowers to eat, and told her she was very pretty, though not in the least like a cockchafer. After a time, all the cockchafers turned up their feelers and said, "She has only 2 legs. How ugly that looks." "She has no feelers," said another. "Her waist is quite slim. Pooh, she is like a human being." "Oh, she is ugly," said all the lady cockchafers, although Tiny was very pretty. Then the cockchafer who had run away with her believed all the others when they said she was ugly, and would have nothing more to say to her, and told her she might go where she liked. Then he flew down with her from the tree and placed her on a daisy, and she wept at the thought that she was so ugly that even the cockchafers would have nothing to say to her. And all the while, she was really the loveliest creature that one could imagine, and as tender and delicate as a beautiful rose leaf. During the whole summer, poor little Tiny lived quite alone in the wide forest. She wove herself a bed with blades of grass and hung it up under a broad leaf to protect herself from the rain. She sucked the honey from the flowers for food and drank the dew from their leaves every morning. So passed away the summer and the autumn, and then came the winter, the long, cold winter. All the birds who had sung to her so sweetly were flown away, and the trees and the flowers had withered. The large clover leaf under the shelter of which she had lived was now rolled together and shriveled up. Nothing remained but a yellow, withered stalk. She felt dreadfully cold, for her clothes were torn, and she was herself so frail and delicate that poor little Tiny was nearly frozen to death. It began to snow, too, and the snowflakes, as they fell upon her, were like a whole shovelful, falling upon one of us, for we are tall, but she was only an inch high. Then she wrapped herself up in a dry leaf, but it cracked in the middle and could not keep her warm, and she shivered with cold. Near the wood in which she had been living lay a cornfield, but the corn had been cut a long time. Nothing remained but the bare, dry stubble standing up out of the frozen ground. It was to her like struggling through a large wood. Oh, how she shivered with the cold. She came at last to the door of a field mouse who had a little den under the corn stubble. There dwelt the field mouse in warmth and comfort, with a whole roomful of corn, a kitchen, and a beautiful dining room. Poor little Tiny stood before the door just like a little beggar girl, and begged for a small piece of barley corn, for she had been without a morsel to eat for 2 days. "You poor little creature," said the field mouse, who was really a good old field mouse. "Come into my warm room and dine with me." She was very pleased with Tiny, so she said, "You are quite welcome to stay with me all the winter, if you like, but you must keep my rooms clean and neat, and tell me stories, for I shall like to hear them very much." And Tiny did all the field mouse asked her, and found herself very comfortable. "We shall have a visitor soon," said the field mouse one day. "My neighbor pays me a visit once a week. He is better off than I am. He has large rooms and wears a beautiful black velvet coat. If you could only have him for a husband, you would be well provided for indeed. But he is blind, so you must tell him some of your prettiest stories." But Tiny did not feel at all interested about this neighbor, for he was a mole. However, he came and paid his visit dressed in his black velvet coat. He is very rich and learned, and his house is 20 times larger than mine, said the field mouse. He was rich and learned, no doubt, but he always spoke slightingly of the sun and the pretty flowers, because he had never seen them. Tiny was obliged to sing to him, "Ladybird, ladybird, fly away home," and many other pretty songs. And the mole fell in love with her because she had such a sweet voice. But he said nothing yet, for he was very cautious. A short time before, the mole had dug a long passage under the earth, which led from the dwelling of the field mouse to his own. And here, she had permission to walk with Tiny whenever she liked. But he warned them not to be alarmed at the sight of a dead bird which lay in the passage. It was a perfect bird, with a beak and feathers, and could not have been dead long, and was lying just where the mole had made his passage. The mole took a piece of phosphorescent wood in his mouth, and it glittered like fire in the dark. Then he went before them to light them through the long, dark passage. When they came to the spot where lay the dead bird, the mole pushed his broad nose through the ceiling. The earth gave way, so that there was a large hole, and the daylight shone into the passage. In the middle of the floor lay a dead swallow, his beautiful wings pulled close to his sides, his feet and his head drawn up under his feathers. The poor bird had evidently died of the cold. It made little Tiny very sad to see it. She did so love the little birds. All the summer they had sung and twittered for her so beautifully. But the mole pushed it aside with his crooked legs and said, "He will sing no more now. How miserable it must be to be born a little bird. I am thankful that none of my children will ever be birds, for they can do nothing but cry, tweet, tweet, and always die of hunger in the winter." "Yes, you may well say that, as a clever man," exclaimed the field mouse. "What is the use of his twittering? For when winter comes, he must either starve or be frozen to death. Still, birds are very high bred." Tiny said nothing. But when the two others had turned their backs on the bird, she stooped down and stroked aside the soft feathers which covered the head, and kissed the closed eyelids. "Perhaps this was the one who sang to me so sweetly in the summer," she said. "And how much pleasure it gave me, you dear, pretty bird." So, the mole now stopped up the hole through which the daylight shone, and then accompanied the lady home. But during the night, Tiny could not sleep, so she got out of bed and wove a large, beautiful carpet of hay. Then she carried it to the dead bird and spread it over him, with some down from the flowers which she had found in the field mouse's room. It was as soft as wool, and she spread some of it on each side of the bird, so that he might lie warmly in the cold earth. "Farewell, you pretty little bird," said she. "Farewell. Thank you for your delightful singing during the summer, when all the trees were green and the warm sun shone upon us. Then she laid her head on the bird's breast, but she was alarmed immediately, for it seemed as if something inside the bird went thump, thump. It was the bird's heart. He was not really dead, only benumbed with the cold, and the warmth had restored him to life. In autumn, all the swallows fly away into warm countries, but if one happens to linger, the cold seizes it. It becomes frozen and falls down as if dead. It remains where it fell, and the cold snow covers it. Tiny trembled very much. She was quite frightened, for the bird was large, a great deal larger than herself. She was only an inch high, but she took courage, laid the wool more thickly over the poor swallow, and then took a leaf, which she had used for her own counterpane, and laid it over the head of the poor bird. The next morning, she again stole out to see him. He was alive, but very weak. He could only open his eyes for a moment to look at Tiny, who stood by, holding a piece of decayed wood in her hand, for she had no other lantern. "Thank you, pretty little maiden," said the sick swallow. "I have been so nicely warmed that I shall soon regain my strength and be able to fly about again in the warm sunshine." "Oh," said she, "it is cold out of doors now. It snows and freezes. Stay in your warm bed. I will take care of you." Then she brought the swallow some water in a flower leaf, and after he had drank, he told her that he had wounded one of his wings in a thorn bush, and could not fly as fast as the others, who were soon far away on their journey to warm countries. Then, at last, he had fallen to the earth, and could remember no more, nor how he came to be where she had found him. The whole winter, the swallow remained underground, and Tiny nursed him with care and love. Neither the mole nor the field mouse knew anything about it, for they did not like swallows. Very soon, the springtime came, and the sun warmed the earth. Then the swallow bade farewell to Tiny, and she opened the hole in the ceiling which the mole had made. The sun shone in upon them so beautifully that the swallow asked her if she would go with him. She could sit on his back, he said, and he would fly away with her into the green woods. But Tiny knew it would make the field mouse very grieved if she left her in that manner. So she said, "No, I cannot." "Farewell then, farewell, you good, pretty little maiden," said the swallow, and he flew out into the sunshine. Tiny looked after him, and the tears rose in her eyes. She was very fond of the poor swallow. "Tweet, weet," sang the bird, as he flew out into the green woods, and Tiny felt very sad. She was not allowed to go out into the warm sunshine. The corn, which had been sown in the field over the house of the field mouse, had grown up high into the air and formed a thick wood to Tiny, who was only an inch in height. "You are going to be married, Tiny," said the field mouse. "My neighbor has asked for you. What good fortune for a poor child like you. Now, we will prepare your wedding clothes. They must be both woolen and linen. Nothing must be wanting when you are the mole's wife." Tiny had to turn the spindle, and the field mouse hired 4 spiders who were to weave day and night. Every evening, the mole visited her and was continually speaking of the time when the summer would be over. Then he would keep his wedding day with Tiny. But now the heat of the sun was so great that it burned the earth and made it quite hard, like a stone. As soon as the summer was over, the wedding should take place. But Tiny was not at all pleased, for she did not like the tiresome mole. Every morning when the sun rose, and every evening when it went down, she would creep out at the door, and as the wind blew aside the ears of corn so that she could see the blue sky, she thought how beautiful and bright it seemed out there, and wished so much to see her dear swallow again. But he never returned, for by this time he had flown far away into the lovely green forest. When autumn arrived, Tiny had her outfit quite ready, and the field mouse said to her, "In 4 weeks the wedding must take place." Then Tiny wept and said she would not marry the disagreeable mole. "Nonsense," replied the field mouse. "Now don't be obstinate, or I shall bite you with my white teeth. He is a very handsome mole. The queen herself does not wear more beautiful velvets and furs. His kitchen and cellars are quite full. You ought to be very thankful for such good fortune." So the wedding day was fixed, on which the mole was to fetch Tiny away to live with him deep under the earth, and never again to see the warm sun, because he did not like it. The poor child was very unhappy at the thought of saying farewell to the beautiful sun, and as the field mouse had given her permission to stand at the door, she went to look at it once more. "Farewell, bright sun," she cried, stretching out her arm towards it. And then she walked a short distance from the house, for the corn had been cut, and only the dry stubble remained in the fields. "Farewell, farewell," she repeated, twining her arm round a little red flower that grew just by her side. "Greet the little swallow from me, if you should see him again." "Tweet, tweet," sounded over her head suddenly. She looked up, and there was the swallow himself flying close by. As soon as he spied Tiny, he was delighted. And then she told him how unwilling she felt to marry the ugly mole, and to live always beneath the earth, and never to see the bright sun anymore. And as she told him, she wept. "Cold winter is coming," said the swallow, "and I am going to fly away into warmer countries. Will you go with me? You can sit on my back and fasten yourself on with your sash. Then we can fly away from the ugly mole and his gloomy rooms, far away over the mountains into warmer countries where the sun shines more brightly than here, where it is always summer and the flowers bloom in greater beauty. Fly now with me, dear little Tiny. You saved my life when I lay frozen in that dark passage." "Yes, I will go with you," said Tiny, and she seated herself on the bird's back, with her feet on his outstretched wings, and tied her girdle to one of his strongest feathers. Then the swallow rose in the air and flew over forest and over sea, high above the highest mountains, covered with eternal snow. Tiny would have been frozen in the cold air, but she crept under the bird's warm feathers, keeping her little head uncovered so that she might admire the beautiful lands over which they passed. At length, they reached the warm countries where the sun shines brightly, and the sky seems so much higher above the earth. Here, on the hedges and by the wayside, grew purple, green, and white grapes. Lemons and oranges hung from trees in the woods, and the air was fragrant with myrtles and orange blossoms. Beautiful children ran along the country lanes, playing with large, gay butterflies. And as the swallow flew farther and farther, every place appeared still more lovely. At last, they came to a blue lake, and by the side of it, shaded by trees of the deepest green, stood a palace of dazzling white marble, built in the olden times. Vines clustered round its lofty pillars, and at the top were many swallows' nests, and one of these was the home of the swallow who carried Tiny. "This is my house," said the swallow, "but it would not do for you to live there. You would not be comfortable. You must choose for yourself one of those lovely flowers, and I will put you down upon it, and then you shall have everything that you can wish to make you happy." "That will be delightful," she said, and clapped her little hands for joy. A large marble pillar lay on the ground, which, in falling, had been broken into 3 pieces. Between these pieces grew the most beautiful, large, white flowers. So the swallow flew down with Tiny and placed her on one of the broad leaves. But how surprised she was to see in the middle of the flower a tiny little man, as white and transparent as if he had been made of crystal. He had a coiled crown on his head and delicate wings at his shoulders, and was not much larger than Tiny herself. He was the angel of the flower, for a tiny man and a tiny woman dwell in every flower, and this was the king of them all. "Oh, how beautiful he is," whispered Tiny to the swallow. The little prince was at first quite frightened at the bird, who was like a giant, compared to such a delicate little creature as himself. But when he saw Tiny, he was delighted, and thought her the prettiest little maiden he had ever seen. He took the gold crown from his head and placed it on hers, and asked her name, and if she would be his wife and queen over all the flowers. This certainly was a very different sort of husband to the son of a toad, or the mole with my black velvet and fur. So she said, "Yes," to the handsome prince. Then all the flowers opened, and out of each came a little lady or a tiny lord, all so pretty it was quite a pleasure to look at them. Each of them brought Tiny a present, but the best gift was a pair of beautiful wings, which had belonged to a large white fly, and they fastened them to Tiny's shoulders so that she might fly from flower to flower. Then there was much rejoicing, and the little swallow who sat above them in his nest was asked to sing a wedding song, which he did as well as he could. But in his heart he felt sad, for he was very fond of Tiny, and would have liked never to part from her again. "You must not be called Tiny anymore," said the spirit of the flowers to her. "It is an ugly name, and you are so very pretty. We will call you Maya." "Farewell, farewell," said the swallow, with a heavy heart, as he left the warm countries to fly back into Denmark. There he had a nest over the window of a house in which dwelt the writer of fairy tales. The swallow sang, "Tweet, tweet," and from his song came the whole story. The Naughty Boy. A long time ago, there lived an old poet, a thoroughly kind old poet. As he was sitting one evening in his room, a dreadful storm arose without, and the rain streamed down from heaven. But the old poet sat warm and comfortable in his chimney corner, where the fire blazed and the roasting apple hissed. "Those who have not a roof over their heads will be wetted to the skin," said the good old poet. "Oh, let me in, let me in! I am cold, and I'm so wet," exclaimed suddenly a child that stood crying at the door and knocking for admittance, while the rain poured down and the wind made all the windows rattle. "Poor thing," said the old poet as he went to open the door. There stood a little boy, quite naked, and the water ran down from his long golden hair. He trembled with cold, and had he not come into a warm room, he would most certainly have perished in the frightful tempest. "Poor child," said the old poet, as he took the boy by the hand Come in, and I will soon restore thee. Thou shalt have wine and roasted apples, for thou art verily a charming child. And the boy was so really. His eyes were like two bright stars, and although the water trickled down his hair, it waved in beautiful curls. He looked exactly like a little angel, but he was so pale, and his whole body trembled with cold. He had a nice little bow in his hand, but it was quite spoiled by the rain, and the tints of his many-colored arrows ran one into the other. The old poet seated himself beside his hearth and took the little fellow on his lap. He squeezed the water out of his dripping hair, warmed his hands between his own, and boiled for him some sweet wine. Then the boy recovered. His cheeks again grew rosy. He jumped down from the lap where he was sitting and danced round the kind old poet. "You are a merry fellow," said the old man. "What's your name?" "My name is Cupid," answered the boy. "Don't you know me? There lies my bow. It shoots well, I can assure you. Look, the weather is now clearing up, and the moon is shining clear again through the window. Why, your bow is quite spoiled," said the old poet. "That were sad indeed," said the boy, and he took the bow in his hand and examined it on every side. "Oh, it is dry again, and is not hurt at all. The string is quite tight. I will try it directly." And he bent his bow, took aim, and shot an arrow at the old poet, right into his heart. "You see now that my bow was not spoiled," said he, laughing, and away he ran. The naughty boy, to shoot the old poet in that way, he who had taken him into his warm room, who had treated him so kindly, and who had given him warm wine and the very best apples. The poor poet lay on the earth and wept, for the arrow had really flown into his heart. "Fie," said he, "how naughty a boy Cupid is. I will tell all children about him, that they may take care and not play with him, for he will only cause them sorrow and many a heartache." And all good children to whom he related this story took great heed of this naughty Cupid. But he made fools of them still, for he is astonishingly cunning. When the university students come from the lectures, he runs beside them in a black coat and with a book under his arm. It is quite impossible for them to know him, and they walk along with him arm in arm, as if he too were a student like themselves. And then, unperceived, he thrusts an arrow to their bosom. When the young maidens come from being examined by the clergyman, or go to church to be confirmed, there he is again, close behind them. Yes, he is forever following people. At the play, he sits in the great chandelier and burns in bright flames, so that people think it is really a flame, but they soon discover it is something else. He roves about in the garden of the palace and upon the ramparts. Yes, once he even shot your father and mother right in the heart. Ask them only, and you will hear what they'll tell you. Oh, he is a naughty boy, that Cupid. You must never have anything to do with him. He is forever running after everybody. Only think, he shot an arrow once at your old grandmother. But that is a long time ago, and it is all past now. However, a thing of that sort she never forgets. Fie, naughty Cupid. But now you know him, and you know too how ill-behaved he is. The traveling companion. Poor John was very sad, for his father was so ill. He had no hope of his recovery. John sat alone with the sick man in the little room, and the lamp had nearly burnt out, for it was late in the night. "You have been a good son, John," said the sick father, "and God will help you on in the world." He looked at him as he spoke with mild, earnest eyes, drew a deep sigh, and died. Yet it appeared as if he still slept. John wept bitterly. He had no one in the wide world now, neither father, mother, brother, nor sister. Poor John. He knelt down by the bed, kissed his dead father's hand, and wept many, many bitter tears. But at last his eyes closed, and he fell asleep with his head resting against the hard bedpost. Then he dreamed a strange dream. He thought he saw the sun shining upon him, and his father alive and well, and even heard him laughing, as he used to do when he was very happy. A beautiful girl with a golden crown on her head and long shining hair gave him her hand, and his father said, "See what a bride you have won. She is the loveliest maiden on the whole earth." Then he awoke, and all the beautiful things vanished before his eyes. His father lay dead on the bed, and he was all alone. Poor John. During the following week, the dead man was buried. The son walked behind the coffin, which contained his father, whom he so dearly loved and would never again behold. He heard the earth fall on the coffin lid and watched it till only a corner remained in sight, and at last that also disappeared. He felt as if his heart would break with its weight of sorrow, till those who stood round the grave sang a psalm, and the sweet, holy tones brought tears into his eyes, which relieved him. The sun shone brightly down on the green trees, as if it would say, "You must not be so sorrowful, John. Do you see the beautiful blue sky above you? Your father is up there, and he prays to the loving Father of all, that you may do well in the future." "I will always be good," said John, "and then I shall go to be with my Father in heaven. What joy it will be when we see each other again, how much I shall have to relate to him, and how many things he will be able to explain to me of the delights of heaven, and teach me as he once did on earth. Oh, what joy it will be. He pictured it all so plainly to himself that he smiled even while the tears ran down his cheeks. The little birds in the chestnut trees twittered, "Tweet, tweet." They were so happy, although they had seen the funeral. But they seemed as if they knew that the dead man was now in heaven, and that he had wings much larger and more beautiful than their own. And he was happy now, because he had been good here on earth, and they were glad of it. John saw them fly away out of the green trees into the wide world, and he longed to fly with them. But first, he cut out a large wooden cross to place on his father's grave. And when he brought it there in the evening, he found the grave decked out with gravel and flowers. Strangers had done this, they who had known the good old father who was now dead, and who had loved him very much. Early the next morning, John packed up his little bundle of clothes and placed all his money, which consisted of $50 and a few shillings, in his girdle. With this, he determined to try his fortune in the world. But first, he went into the churchyard, and by his father's grave, he offered up a prayer and said, "Farewell." As he passed through the fields, all the flowers looked fresh and beautiful in the warm sunshine and nodded in the wind, as if they wished to say, "Welcome to the green wood, where all is fresh and bright." Then John turned to have one more look at the old church in which he had been christened in his infancy, and where his father had taken him every Sunday to hear the service and join in singing the psalms. As he looked at the old tower, he espied the ringer standing at one of the narrow openings with his little pointed red cap on his head, and shading his eyes from the sun with his bent arm. John nodded farewell to him, and the little ringer waved his red cap, laid his hand on his heart, and kissed his hand to him a great many times, to show that he felt kindly towards him, and wished him a prosperous journey. John continued his journey, and thought of all the wonderful things he should see in the large, beautiful world, till he found himself farther away from home than ever he had been before. He did not even know the names of the places he passed through, and could scarcely understand the language of the people he met, for he was far away in a strange land. The first night he slept on a haystack out in the fields, for there was no other bed for him. But it seemed to him so nice and comfortable that even a king need not wish for a better. The field, the brook, the haystack, with the blue sky above, formed a beautiful sleeping room. The green grass, with the little red and white flowers, was the carpet. The elder bushes and the hedges of wild roses looked like garlands on the walls, and for a bath he could have the clear, fresh water of the brook, while the rushes bowed their heads to him to wish him good morning and good evening. The moon, like a large lamp, hung high up in the blue ceiling, and he had no fear of its setting fire to his curtains. John slept here quite safely all night, and when he awoke, the sun was up, and all the little birds were singing round him. "Good morning, good morning. Are you not up yet?" It was Sunday, and the bells were ringing for church. As the people went in, John followed them. He heard God's word, joined in singing the psalms, and listened to the preacher. It seemed to him just as if he were in his own church, where he had been christened and had sung the psalms with his father. Out in the churchyard were several graves, and on some of them the grass had grown very high. John thought of his father's grave, which he knew at last would look like these, as he was not there to weed and attend to it. Then he set to work, pulled up the high grass, raised the wooden crosses which had fallen down, and replaced the wreaths which had been blown away from their places by the wind, thinking all the time, perhaps someone is doing the same for my father's grave, as I am not there to do it. Outside the church door stood an old beggar, leaning on his crutch. John gave him his silver shillings, and then he continued his journey, feeling lighter and happier than ever. Towards evening, the weather became very stormy, and he hastened on as quickly as he could to get shelter. But it was quite dark by the time he reached a little, lonely church which stood on a hill. "I will go in here," he said, "and sit down in a corner, for I am quite tired and want rest." So he went in and seated himself. Then he folded his hands and offered up his evening prayer, and was soon fast asleep and dreaming, while the thunder rolled and the lightning flashed without. When he awoke, it was still night, but the storm had ceased, and the moon shone in upon him through the windows. Then he saw an open coffin standing in the center of the church, which contained a dead man waiting for burial. John was not at all timid. He had a good conscience, and he knew also that the dead can never injure anyone. It is living wicked men who do harm to others. Two such wicked persons stood now by the dead man, who had been brought to the church to be buried. Their evil intentions were to throw the poor dead body outside the church door and not leave him to rest in his coffin. "Why do you do this?" asked John, when he saw what they were going to do. "It is very wicked. Leave him to rest in peace in Christ's name." "Nonsense," replied the two dreadful men. "He has cheated us. He owed us money which he could not pay, and now he is dead, we shall not get a penny. So we mean to have our revenge, and let him lie like a dog outside the church door." "I have only $50, said John. "It is all I possess in the world. But I will give it to you if you will promise me faithfully to leave the dead man in peace. I shall be able to get on without the money. I have strong and healthy limbs, and God will always help me." "Why, of course," said the horrid men. "If you will pay his debt, we will both promise not to touch him. You may depend upon that." And then they took the money he offered them, laughed at him for his good nature, and went their way. Then he laid the dead body back in the coffin, folded the hands, and took leave of it, and went away contentedly through the great forest. All around him, he could see the prettiest little elves dancing in the moonlight, which shone through the trees. They were not disturbed by his appearance, for they knew he was good and harmless among men. They are wicked people only who can never obtain a glimpse of fairies. Some of them were not taller than the breadth of a finger, and they wore golden combs in their long, yellow hair. They were rocking themselves two together on the large dewdrops with which the leaves and the high grass were sprinkled. Sometimes the dewdrops would roll away, and then they fell down between the stems of the long grass and caused a great deal of laughing and noise among the other little people. It was so charming to watch them at play. Then they sang songs, and John remembered that he had learnt those pretty songs when he was a little boy. Large, speckled spiders, with silver crowns on their heads, were employed to spin suspension bridges and palaces from one hedge to another. And when the tiny drops fell upon them, they glittered in the moonlight like shining glass. This continued till sunrise. Then the little elves crept into the flower buds, and the wind seized the bridges and palaces and fluttered them in the air like cobwebs. As John left the wood, a strong man's voice called after him, "Hello, comrade. Where are you traveling?" "Into the wide world," he replied. "I am only a poor lad. I have neither father nor mother, but God will help me." "I am going into the wide world also," replied the stranger. "Shall we keep each other company?" "With all my heart," he said. And so they went on together. Soon they began to like each other very much, for they were both good. But John found out that the stranger was much more clever than himself. He had traveled all over the world and could describe almost everything. The sun was high in the heavens when they seated themselves under a large tree to eat their breakfast. And at the same moment, an old woman came towards them. She was very old and almost bent double. She leaned upon a stick and carried on her back a bundle of firewood, which she had collected in the forest. Her apron was tied round it, and John saw 3 great stems of fern and some willow twigs peeping out. Just as she came close up to them, her foot slipped, and she fell to the ground, screaming loudly. Poor old woman. She had broken her leg. John proposed directly that they should carry the old woman home to her cottage. But the stranger opened his knapsack and took out a box, in which he said he had a salve that would quickly make her leg well and strong again, so that she would be able to walk home herself as if her leg had never been broken. And all that he would ask in return was the 3 fern stems which she carried in her apron. "That is rather too high a price," said the old woman, nodding her head quite strangely. She did not seem at all inclined to part with the fern stems. However, it was not very agreeable to lie there with a broken leg, so she gave them to him. And such was the power of the ointment, that no sooner had he rubbed her leg with it than the old mother rose up and walked even better than she had done before. But then, this wonderful ointment could not be bought at a chemist's. "What can you want with those 3 fern rods?" asked John of his fellow traveler. "Oh, they will make capital brooms," said he, "and I like them because I have strange whims sometimes." Then they walked on together for a long distance. "How dark the sky is becoming," said John. "And look at those thick, heavy clouds." "Those are not clouds," replied his fellow traveler. "They are mountains, large, lofty mountains, on the tops of which we should be above the clouds, in the pure, free air. Believe me, it is delightful to ascend so high. Tomorrow we shall be there." But the mountains were not so near as they appeared. They had to travel a whole day before they reached them, and pass through black forests and piles of rock as large as a town. The journey had been so fatiguing that John and his fellow traveler stopped to rest at a roadside inn so that they might gain strength for their journey on the morrow. In the large public room of the inn, a great many persons were assembled to see a comedy performed by dolls. The showman had just erected his little theater, and the people were sitting round the room to witness the performance. Right in front, in the very best place, sat a stout butcher, with a great bulldog by his side, who seemed very much inclined to bite. He sat staring with all his eyes, and so indeed did everyone else in the room. And then the play began. It was a pretty piece, with a king and a queen in it, who sat on a beautiful throne and had gold crowns on their heads. The trains to their dresses were very long, according to the fashion, while the prettiest of wooden dolls, with glass eyes and large mustaches, stood at the doors and opened and shut them, that the fresh air might come into the room. It was a very pleasant play, not at all mournful. But just as the queen stood up and walked across the stage, the great bulldog, who should have been held back by his master, made a spring forward and caught the queen in the teeth by the slender wrist, so that it snapped in two. This was a very dreadful disaster. The poor man who was exhibiting the dolls was much annoyed and quite sad about his queen. She was the prettiest doll he had, and the bulldog had broken her head and shoulders off. But after all the people were gone away, the stranger who came with John said that he could soon set her to rights. And then he brought out his box and rubbed the doll with some of the salve with which he had cured the old woman when she broke her leg. As soon as this was done, the doll's back became quite right again. Her head and shoulders were fixed on, and she could even move her limbs herself. There was now no occasion to pull the wires, for the doll acted just like a living creature, excepting that she could not speak. The man to whom the show belonged was quite delighted at having a doll who could dance of herself without being pulled by the wires. None of the other dolls could do this. During the night, when all the people at the inn were gone to bed, someone was heard to sigh so deeply and painfully, and the sighing continued for so long a time that everyone got up to see what could be the matter. The showman went at once to his little theater and found that it proceeded from the dolls, who all lay on the floor sighing piteously and staring with their glass eyes. They all wanted to be rubbed with the ointment, so that, like the queen, they might be able to move of themselves. The queen threw herself on her knees, took off her beautiful crown, and holding it in her hand, cried, "Take this from me, but do rub my husband and his courtiers." The poor man who owned the theater could scarcely refrain from weeping. He was so sorry that he could not help them. Then he immediately spoke to John's comrade and promised him all the money he might receive at the next evening's performance, if he would only rub the ointment on 4 or 5 of his dolls. But the fellow traveler said he did not require anything in return, excepting the sword which the showman wore by his side. As soon as he received the sword, he anointed 6 of the dolls with the ointment, and they were able immediately to dance so gracefully that all the living girls in the room could not help joining in the dance. The coachman danced with the cook, and the waiters with the chambermaids, and all the strangers joined. Even the tongs and the fire shovel made an attempt, but they fell down after the first jump. So after all, it was a very merry night. The next morning, John and his companion left the inn to continue their journey through the great pine forests and over the high mountains. They arrived at last at such a great height that towns and villages lay beneath them, and the church steeples looked like little specks between the green trees. They could see for miles round, far away, to places they had never visited. And John saw more of the beautiful world than he had ever known before. The sun shone brightly in the blue firmament above, and through the clear mountain air came the sound of the huntsman's horn, and the soft, sweet notes brought tears into his eyes, and he could not help exclaiming, "How good and loving God is to give us all this beauty and loveliness in the world to make us happy." His fellow traveler stood by with folded hands, gazing on the dark wood and the towns bathed in the warm sunshine. At this moment, there sounded over their heads sweet music. They looked up and discovered a large white swan hovering in the air and singing as never bird sang before. But the song soon became weaker and weaker. The bird's head drooped, and he sunk slowly down and lay dead at their feet. "It is a beautiful bird," said the traveler, "and these large white wings are worth a great deal of money. I will take them with me. You see now that a sword will be very useful." So he cut off the wings of the dead swan with one blow and carried them away with him. They now continued their journey over the mountains for many miles, till they at length reached a large city containing hundreds of towers that shone in the sunshine like silver. In the midst of the city stood a splendid marble palace, roofed with pure red gold, in which dwelt the king. John and his companion would not go into the town immediately, so they stopped at an inn outside the town to change their clothes, for they wished to appear respectable as they walked through the streets. The landlord told them that the king was a very good man, who never injured anyone. But as to his daughter, heaven defend us. She was indeed a wicked princess. She possessed beauty enough. Nobody could be more elegant or prettier than she was. But what of that? For she was a wicked witch, and in consequence of her conduct, many noble young princes had lost their lives. Anyone was at liberty to make her an offer. Were he a prince or a beggar, it mattered not to her. She would ask him to guess 3 things which she had just thought of. And if he succeed, he was to marry her and be king over all the land when her father died. But if he could not guess these 3 things, then she ordered him to be hanged or to have his head cut off. The old king, her father, was very much grieved at her conduct, but he could not prevent her from being so wicked, because he once said he would have nothing more to do with her lovers. She might do as she pleased. Each prince who came and tried the 3 guesses so that he might marry the princess had been unable to find them out, and had been hanged or beheaded. They had all been warned in time, and might have left her alone if they would. The old king became at last so distressed at all these dreadful circumstances that for a whole day every year he and his soldiers knelt and prayed that the princess might become good. But she continued as wicked as ever. The old women who drank brandy would color it quite black before they drank it, to show how they mourned. And what more could they do? "What a horrible princess," said John. "She ought to be well flogged. If I were the old king, I would have her punished in some way." Just then, they heard the people outside shouting, "Hurrah!" And looking out, they saw the princess passing by, and she was really so beautiful that everybody forgot her wickedness and shouted, "Hurrah!" 12 lovely maidens in white silk dresses, holding golden tulips in their hands, rode by her side on coal-black horses. The princess herself had a snow-white steed, decked with diamonds and rubies. Her dress was of cloth of gold, and the whip she held in her hand looked like a sunbeam. The golden crown on her head glittered like the stars of heaven, and her mantle was formed of thousands of butterflies' wings sewn together. Yet she herself was more beautiful than all. When John saw her, his face became as red as a drop of blood, and he could scarcely utter a word. The princess looked exactly like the beautiful lady with the golden crown, of whom he had dreamed on the night his father died. She appeared to him so lovely that he could not help loving her. It could not be true, he thought, that she was really a wicked witch who ordered people to be hanged or beheaded if they could not guess her thoughts. Everyone has permission to go and ask her hand, even the poorest beggar. "I shall pay a visit to the palace," he said. "I must go, for I cannot help myself." Then they all advised him not to attempt it, for he would be sure to share the same fate as the rest. His fellow traveler also tried to persuade him against it, but John seemed quite sure of success. He brushed his shoes and his coat, washed his face and his hands, combed his soft flaxen hair, and then went out alone into the town and walked to the palace. "Come in," said the king, as John knocked at the door. John opened it, and the old king, in a dressing gown and embroidered slippers, came towards him. He had the crown on his head, carried his scepter in one hand, and the orb in the other. "Wait a bit," said he, and he placed the orb under his arm so that he could offer the other hand to John. But when he found that John was another suitor, he began to weep so violently that both the scepter and the orb fell to the floor, and he was obliged to wipe his eyes with his dressing gown. Poor old king. "Let her alone," he said. "You will fare as badly as all the others. Come, I will show you." Then he led him out into the princess's pleasure gardens, and there he saw a frightful sight. On every tree hung 3 or 4 kings' sons who had wooed the princess, but had not been able to guess the riddles she gave them. Their skeletons rattled in every breeze, so that the terrified birds never dared to venture into the garden. All the flowers were supported by human bones instead of sticks, and human skulls in the flower pots grinned horribly. It was really a doleful garden for a princess. "Do you see all this?" said the old king. "Your fate will be the same as those who are here. Therefore, do not attempt it. You really make me very unhappy. I take these things to heart so very much." John kissed the good old king's hand and said he was sure it would be all right, for he was quite enchanted with the beautiful princess. Then the princess herself came riding into the palace yard with all her ladies, and he wished her good morning. She looked wonderfully fair and lovely when she offered her hand to John, and he loved her more than ever. How could she be a wicked witch, as all the people asserted? He accompanied her into the hall, and the little pages offered them gingerbread nuts and sweetmeats. But the old king was so unhappy he could eat nothing. And besides, gingerbread nuts were too hard for him. It was decided that John should come to the palace the next day, when the judges and the whole of the counselors would be present, to try if he could guess the first riddle. If he succeeded, he would have to come a second time. But if not, he would lose his life. And no one had ever been able to guess even one. However, John was not at all anxious about the result of his trial. On the contrary, he was very merry. He thought only of the beautiful princess and believed that in some way he should have help, but how he knew not, and did not like to think about it. So he danced along the high road as he went back to the inn, where he had left his fellow traveler waiting for him. John could not refrain from telling him how gracious the princess had been, and how beautiful she looked. He longed for the next day so much that he might go to the palace and try his luck at guessing the riddles. But his comrade shook his head and looked very mournful. "I do so wish you to do well," said he. "We might have continued together much longer, and now I am likely to lose you. You poor dear John. I could shed tears, but I will not make you unhappy on the last night we may be together. We will be merry, really merry this evening. Tomorrow, after you are gone, shall be able to weep undisturbed. May." It was very quickly known among the inhabitants of the town that another suitor had arrived for the princess, and there was great sorrow in consequence. The theater remained closed. The women who sold sweetmeats tied crepe round the sugar sticks, and the king and the priests were on their knees in the church. There was a great lamentation, for no one expected John to succeed better than those who had been suitors before. In the evening, John's comrade prepared a large bowl of punch and said, "Now let us be merry and drink to the health of the princess." But after drinking 2 glasses, John became so sleepy that he could not keep his eyes open and fell fast asleep. Then his fellow traveler lifted him gently out of his chair and laid him on the bed. And as soon as it was quite dark, he took the 2 large wings which he had cut from the dead swan and tied them firmly to his own shoulders. Then he put into his pocket the largest of the 3 rods which he had obtained from the old woman who had fallen and broken her leg. After this, he opened the window and flew away over the town, straight towards the palace, and seated himself in a corner, under the window, which looked into the bedroom of the princess. The town was perfectly still when the clocks struck 11:45. Presently, the window opened, and the princess, who had large black wings to her shoulders and a long white mantle, flew away over the city towards a high mountain. The fellow traveler, who had made himself invisible so that she could not possibly see him, flew after her through the air and whipped the princess with his rod, so that the blood came whenever he struck her. Ah, it was a strange flight through the air. The wind caught her mantle, so that it spread out on all sides, like the large sail of a ship, and the moon shone through it. "How it hails, to be sure," said the princess, at each blow she received from the rod, and it served her right to be whipped. At last she reached the side of the mountain and knocked. The mountain opened with a noise like the roll of thunder, and the princess went in. The traveler followed her. No one could see him, as he had made himself invisible. They went through a long, wide passage. 1,000 gleaming spiders ran here and there on the walls, causing them to glitter as if they were illuminated with fire. They next entered a large hall built of silver and gold. Large red and blue flowers shone on the walls, looking like sunflowers in size, but no one could dare to pluck them, for the stems were hideous, poisonous snakes, and the flowers were flames of fire darting out of their jaws. Shining glowworms covered the ceiling, and sky-blue bats flapped their transparent wings. Altogether, the place had a frightful appearance. In the middle of the floor stood a throne, supported by 4 skeleton horses, whose harness had been made by fiery red spiders. The throne itself was made of milk-white glass, and the cushions were little black mice, each biting the other's tail. Over it hung a canopy of rose-colored spiders' webs, spotted with the prettiest little green flies, which sparkled like precious stones. On the throne sat an old magician with a crown on his ugly head and a scepter in his hand. He kissed the princess on the forehead, seated her by his side on the splendid throne, and then the music commenced. Great black grasshoppers played the mouth organ, and the owl struck herself on the body instead of a drum. It was altogether a ridiculous concert. Little black goblins with false lights in their caps danced about the hall. But no one could see the traveler, and he had placed himself just behind the throne where he could see and hear everything. The courtiers who came in afterwards looked noble and grand, but anyone with common sense could see what they really were. Only broomsticks with cabbages for heads. The magician had given them life and dressed them in embroidered robes. It answered very well, as they were only wanted for show. After there had been a little dancing, the princess told the magician that she had a new suitor, and asked him what she could think of for the suitor to guess when he came to the castle the next morning. "Listen to what I say," said the magician. "You must choose something very easy. He is less likely to guess it then. Think of one of your shoes. He will never imagine it is that. Then cut his head off. And mind you, do not forget to bring his eyes with you tomorrow night, that I may eat them." The princess curtsied low and said she would not forget the eyes. The magician then opened the mountain, and she flew home again. But the traveler followed and flogged her so much with the rod that she sighed quite deeply about the heavy hailstorm, and made as much haste as she could to get back to her bedroom through the window. The traveler then returned to the inn where John still slept, took off his wings, and laid down on the bed, for he was very tired. Early in the morning, John awoke, and when his fellow traveler got up, he said that he had a very wonderful dream about the princess and her shoe. He therefore advised John to ask her if she had not thought of her shoe. Of course, the traveler knew this from what the magician in the mountain had said. "I may as well say that as anything," said John. "Perhaps your dream may come true. Still, I will say farewell, for if I guess wrong, I shall never see you again." Then they embraced each other, and John went into the town and walked to the palace. The great hall was full of people, and the judges sat in armchairs, with eider-down cushions to rest their heads upon, because they had so much to think of. The old king stood near, wiping his eyes with his white pocket handkerchief. When the princess entered, she looked even more beautiful than she had appeared the day before, and greeted everyone present most gracefully. But to John, she gave her hand and said, good morning to you." Now came the time for John to guess what she was thinking of. And oh, how kindly she looked at him as she spoke. But when he uttered the single word, "shoe," she turned as pale as a ghost. All her wisdom could not help her, for he had guessed rightly. Oh, how pleased the old king was. It was quite amusing to see how he capered about. All the people clapped their hands, both on his account and John's, who had guessed rightly the first time. His fellow traveler was glad also, when he heard how successful John had been. But John folded his hands and thanked God, who, he felt quite sure, would help him again. And he knew he had to guess twice more. The evening passed pleasantly, like the one preceding. While John slept, his companion flew behind the princess to the mountain and flogged her even harder than before. This time, he had taken 2 rods with him. No one saw him go in with her, and he heard all that was said. The princess this time was to think of a glove, and he told John as if he had again heard it in a dream. The next day, therefore, he was able to guess correctly the second time, and it caused great rejoicing at the palace. The whole court jumped about as they had seen the king do the day before, but the princess lay on the sofa and would not say a single word. All now depended upon John. If he only guessed rightly the third time, he would marry the princess and reign over the kingdom after the death of the old king. But if he failed, he would lose his life, and the magician would have his beautiful blue eyes. That evening, John said his prayers and went to bed very early, and soon fell asleep calmly. But his companion, tied on his wings to his shoulders, took 3 rods, and with his sword at his side, flew to the palace. It was a very dark night, and so stormy that the tiles flew from the roofs of the houses, and the trees in the garden upon which the skeletons hung bent themselves like reeds before the wind. The lightning flashed, and the thunder rolled in one long-continued peal night. The window of the castle opened, and the princess flew out. She was pale as death, but she laughed at the storm as if it were not bad enough. Her white mantle fluttered in the wind like a large sail, and the traveler flogged her with the 3 rods till the blood trickled down, and at last she could scarcely fly. She contrived, however, to reach the mountain. "What a hailstorm!" she said as she entered. "I have never been out in such weather as this." "Yes, there may be too much of a good thing sometimes," said the magician. Then the princess told him that John had guessed rightly the second time, and if he succeeded the next morning, he would win, and she could never come to the mountain again, or practice magic as she had done. and therefore she was quite unhappy. "I will find out something for you to think of, which he will never guess, unless he is a greater conjurer than myself. But now, let us be merry." Then he took the princess by both hands, and they danced with all the little goblins and jack-o'-lanterns in the room. The red spiders sprang here and there on the walls quite as merrily, and the flowers of fire appeared as if they were throwing out sparks. The owl beat the drum, the crickets whistled, and the grasshoppers played the mouth organ. It was a very ridiculous ball. After they had danced enough, the princess was obliged to go home, for fear she should be missed at the palace. The magician offered to go with her, that they might be company to each other on the way. Then they flew away through the bad weather, and the traveler followed them, and broke his 3 rods across their shoulders. The magician had never been out in such a hailstorm as this. Just by the palace, the magician stopped to wish the princess farewell, and to whisper in her ear, "Tomorrow, think of my head." But the traveler heard it, and just as the princess slipped through the window into her bedroom, and the magician turned round to fly back to the mountain, he seized him by the long black beard, and with his saber cut off the wicked conjurer's head just behind the shoulders, so that he could not even see who it was. He threw the body into the sea to the fishes, and after dipping the head into the water, he tied it up in a silk handkerchief, took it with him to the inn, and then went to bed. The next morning, he gave John the handkerchief, and told him not to untie it till the princess asked him what she was thinking of. There were so many people in the great hall of the palace that they stood as thick as radishes tied together in a bundle. The council sat in their armchairs with the white cushions. The old king wore new robes, and the golden crown and scepter had been polished up so that he looked quite smart. But the princess was very pale and wore a black dress as if she were going to a funeral. "What have I thought of?" asked the princess of John. He immediately untied the handkerchief, and was himself quite frightened when he saw the head of the ugly magician. Everyone shuddered, for it was terrible to look at. But the princess sat like a statue and could not utter a single word. At length, she rose and gave John her hand, for he had guessed rightly. She looked at no one, but sighed deeply, and said, "You are my master now. This evening, our marriage must take place." "I am very pleased to hear it," said the old king. "It is just what I wish." Then all the people shouted, "Hurrah!" The band played music in the streets, the bells rang, and the cake women took the black crepe off the sugar sticks. There was universal joy. 3 oxen stuffed with ducks and chickens, were roasted whole in the marketplace, where everyone might help himself to a slice. The fountains spouted forth the most delicious wine, and whoever bought a penny loaf at the baker's received 6 large buns full of raisins as a present. In the evening, the whole town was illuminated. The soldiers fired off cannons, and the boys let off crackers. There was eating and drinking, dancing and jumping everywhere. In the palace, the high-born gentlemen and beautiful ladies danced with each other, and they could be heard at a great distance singing the following song. Here are maidens, young and fair, dancing in the summer air, like 2 spinning wheels at play. Pretty maidens, dance away, dance the spring and summer through, till the soul falls from your shoe. But the princess was still a witch, and she could not love John. His fellow traveler had thought of that, so he gave John 3 feathers out of the swan's wings, and a little bottle with a few drops in it. He told him to place a large bath full of water by the princess's bed, and put the feathers and the drops into it. Then, at the moment she was about to get into bed, he must give her a little push so that she might fall into the water, and then dip her 3 times. This would destroy the power of the magician, and she would love him very much. John did all that his companion told him to do. The princess shrieked aloud when he dipped her under the water the first time, and struggled under his hands in the form of a great black swan with fiery eyes. As she rose the second time from the water, the swan had become white, with a black ring round its neck. John allowed the water to close once more over the bird, and at the same time it changed into a most beautiful princess. She was more lovely even than before, and thanked him, while her eyes sparkled with tears, for having broken the spell of the magician. The next day, the king came with the whole court to offer their congratulations, and stayed till quite late. Last of all came the traveling companion. He had his staff in his hand, and his knapsack on his back. John kissed him many times, and told him he must not go. He must remain with him, for he was the cause of all his good fortune. But the traveler shook his head, and said gently and kindly, "No, my time is up now. I have only paid my debt to you. Do you remember the dead man whom the bad people wished to throw out of his coffin? You gave all you possessed that he might rest in his grave. I am that man." As he said this, he vanished. The wedding festivities lasted a whole month. John and his princess loved each other dearly, and the old king lived to see many a happy day when he took their little children on his knees and let them play with his scepter. And John became king over the whole country.